Welcome everybody to another chess video. In this video, we're going to learn all about the Queen's Gambit, which is a new opening that I'm sure you guys will enjoy. So maybe you've heard about the term Queen's Gambit and other sources from in other settings and other circumstances, but we're going to learn it now in chess. The Queen's Gambit begins with the move d4. Okay, so the move d4, d5, c4. This is the Queen's Gambit. Okay, let's look into it a bit further because that's pretty boring. Okay, d4. What do we know about the move d4? d4 begins the Queen's Gambit as it is the Queen, and the Queen is pushing the Queen's pawn. So Queen's Gambit. There's also the King's Gambit, which is the opposite of the Queen's Gambit. The King's Gambit is the opposite of the Queen's Gambit, but that's not what this is about. So let's begin. d4. What do we know about the move d4? d4 is a good move because why? It controls the center, right? If we know our opening principles, we know d4 is a move. It's a move that's very often played. Sorry, that was a little bit of a short intro. Yeah, what I'm saying is I'm going to teach you guys the Queen's Gambit. There's nothing much to say. Okay, d4, putting the pawn in the center. Okay, so we know the center squares are d4, e4, d5, and e5. Now, black will respond with d5 very, very often, especially in probably the level you are in. You may later see knight to f6, which is, we'll have to get into some Indian things. There's c4 here, there's knight f3, there's a bunch of other things that you can get from knight f3. Okay, but we're not in knight f3 territory, we're in d5 territory. Now we're going to get into c4. c4 is what triggers the Queen's Gambit. To the untrained eye, you may think, wait a minute, this pawn can simply take my pawn. This pawn can take my pawn. Why did I play c4? What's the point of c4? Good question. This video will have two parts, all in this video, okay, so you won't miss any of it, sorry. This video will have two parts. The Queen's Gambit accepted and the Queen's Gambit declined. Now, there are technically two forms of Queen's Gambit declined, which is e6 and c6. c6 turns it into an opening known as the Slav defense, which gets pretty complex. So we're not going to get into that right now. There's even something called the semi-Slav. So, yeah, okay, we're not getting into the Slav right now. There'll be a separate video on the Slav. Okay, Queen's Gambit, c4. One more time for you, d4, d5, c4. d4, d5, c4. Okay, that's all there is to it. So, we're going to look at accepted first. What do you think Queen's Gambit accepted is? Accept the pawn. Okay, so in the Queen's Gambit, you can immediately win back the move with the move win back the pawn with the move Queen a4 check, because it's a double attack, right? You attack the king and you attack the pawn. Now, I'm not going to recommend that, but you'll see why later, okay? So you can block there, you can block with knight d7, you can block with c6, you can block with many things, okay? So then you just win back the pawn, right? Now, I would not recommend this Queen a4 check, although it looks pretty appealing for beginners and like, aha, look, double attack. What are you going to do now? But it's okay. I'll explain to you why I, first of all, as black, would not take the pawn at all, because you'll see why. Okay, so for your level, I would recommend playing the move e4 as soon as you see takes, because what have we learned about the center? That's why this move c4 is so important. We've learned about the center that if you control it, and if you have your pieces developed, if your king is safe, you're in a pretty good position. So first of all, you want to control the center in the opening. That's what most of the opening is about. Other than castling the king, developing the pieces, you want to hit the center. So what this move c4 does is it creates a problem for this pawn. This pawn can decide. Black can decide, oh, I'm going to be ahead a pawn. I'm going to be up a pawn, and I'm going to give up the entire center. Black has no space in the center. Okay. Now, black can strike back, but after striking back, they'll meet other problems. You could play d5 here. You can play a bunch of other things. You just have pieces in the center because they gave up their pawn like this. So now you're gonna be having lots of space in the center, right? So that's what this move c4 does. It creates a problem for the pawn, right? So the pawn will decide, I'm gonna leave the center and I'm just gonna give you the center, because what was stopping you from playing e4 here? It was this pawn, because it would just take. But if this pawn is here now, you got the entirety of the center. Look, your pawns control all these squares. They control all those squares. And you have created this for black, where they used to be in the center, but now you've deviated them away. And look at what this move e4 does. It opens up an attack as well to regain your pawn. So you may not be down a pawn for the rest of the game after all. You probably won't be at all. So you're down a pawn now. That's all right. You've played e4. You have a massive control of the center. They don't have any right now. Now they can start gaining it. Now for you beginners, this is not a massive advantage. Okay, you're not. Most likely, your opponent will be okay at defending the position. I mean, if you're playing a bunch of 100s who don't know any openings, and you're here studying openings for me, then yeah, you'll have a massive advantage because they're rated 100. Okay, so you have your kings, you have your pawns here attacking the center, and this pawn is doing absolutely nothing. So by playing the move e4, you are attacking the pawn, so you may even be able to win it back. Okay, so that is what happens when you play c4 and they take back, right? You can, I would strongly recommend e4, okay? Now, what's the reason I wouldn't like to recommend queen a4 check? Well, the reason I don't recommend queen a4 check is because you can start being, not immediately, but you can start being attacked. Like, you will start being, for example, they might play knight d7, then when you take back the pawn, you're going to start to spend a lot of time running away with the queen. Okay, you're gonna start to back up. And you're also gonna have to keep defending this pawn. Whereas if you just have it like this, where the queen is still here nicely defending it, you've got defense for the pawn. You can later play knight f3 to further defend the pawn. Whereas if your queen is wandering away here just to win back the pawn, where you could have massive control of the center, that's why I don't recommend it. That's why I do not recommend queen a4 check. Okay, so you could do it later on, but I do not recommend it as a beginner. I'd recommend the move e4 for sure. Okay, e4. Definite move after takes. Okay, so takes and e4. Now you do not have to play e4. I would strongly recommend e4 though. You could play other moves, like you could play knight f3. Knight f3 defends the pawn. You could prepare e4 for later. Now they could play knight f6. They could play a bunch of different moves. This is a bit calmer of a game. Okay, it's a bit more calm. Whereas if you play e4, you're gonna start marching these pawns up. You're gonna start developing, and you're just gonna have a lead in the opening. You're gonna be tempo ahead because you are ready to develop. They still have nothing in the center. They're gonna have to develop behind you. Whereas you already have control of the center. You could even fianchetto some bishops to help support your pawns, and you're just going to be having a happy game if you play e4. Okay, so that's what I would recommend. I'm not really going to get into the other moves that you could play. Okay, here, like, as long as you don't play something like, I don't know, as long as you don't play queen to d3, then you'll be fine. Okay, as long as you don't play I don't know, what's the stupidest move you could possibly play. As long as you don't play foolish moves, yeah, queen d3 is the worst move you could possibly play. Okay, as long as you don't play foolish moves, you'll be fine. Like, just also don't play like knight h6, knight a6. Okay, but enough on what you shouldn't play. What you should play, e4 for sure, as I've been saying. Okay, you can play knight f3, you can play e3, even if you're a bit more of a slowly building up to the win kind of player. But I would go e4. Okay, e4. So, let's get a couple moves into what we should do, because let's just get into it. Then we can transfer into the middle game. That's for another separate video, middle games. Okay? So, knight to f6. That's seen very commonly. But what do you have to know? You've put this pawn here, you put this pawn on e4. So you got to make sure it's defended. You could play e5 to kick the knight away. This is seen very commonly. But you could also, if you're a bit more of a defensive player, you could play knight to c3. Okay, which defends the pawn. See, because if takes, you could win back. What's worth more than a pawn? A knight. Okay, so I would recommend though e5. Just keep snagging more space in the center. Okay, then they might go knight d5. You could win back the pawn. See, that's what happens if they play too passively. Like knight f6 is not a passive move on like a grandmaster level, but this move I wouldn't recommend to you as black if you're playing the Queen's Gambit. We'll look at black later though. Okay, knight f6 though. Knight f6 is totally fine. E5, I just wouldn't play it. Now grandmasters might agree with me, and I would have to say yes to the grandmaster, as I've said so many times before, because I'm not a grandmaster. Okay, d5. They could play knight d5. They could play knight fd7. They could play knight g8. All these things I'm seeing here from master games. Okay. So, say they play knight g5, you will always be able to win back that pawn, okay? If you play here, you will guarantee to win back the pawn that you sacrificed for the nice center control. That's the main point of the Queen's Gambit, just win space in the center, okay? That's knight f6. They could also play e5. What do you do if you play e5? apparently lots of masters have played knight f3. Okay, I would not play knight f3 because basically what happens is when you're not a grandmaster, when you're not a grandmaster, you can't know what they're gonna play, because grandmasters play like to 15 moves with theory that they basically know the other person is gonna play. Now there's sometimes that doesn't happen. Yes, it's true. For 15 moves, they pretty much know what they're gonna play because all the grandmasters know their theory to move 20. I do not. That's why I would not recommend playing a move like knight f3. Okay, knight f3 I would not recommend, just because it gets further into theory, whereas just you could say, oh, this is logical, just push the pawn further, and you have here, you could even create a nice pawn chain, but not right now, okay. I wouldn't recommend f3 just after d5, so you can have a pawn chain, okay, because then where's this knight gonna go? Goes on f3, okay. So that's what happens if e5. I would recommend d5. Okay, you could go knight f3 if you're a bit more adventurous, or if you're just a high-rated player. If you're a really high-rated player, I don't know why you're watching this video, other than you're being really devoted to this channel. Thank you very much, but I'm sure you're not. Okay, so that's what would be e5. Okay. What else is there? As a response for black? Black can also defend their pawn. Black can play a move like b5. Okay, b5 is not seen very often in chess. For b5 is not seen very much in high-rated chess, master game chess. Okay, but if you do see b5, I would recommend a4. What a4 does is it looks like you're sacrificing a second pawn, but you're not. You really get this. Then the queen defends here, and you can go here. The bishop goes here. Okay, but like I said, don't bring out your queen early. So you could take with the rook, but I wouldn't. Wait, sorry. Yeah, here. If they take here, you can take with the rook, or you can take with the queen. I would take with the rook. Now this is getting into really strange positions. Okay, and like no master games have played this before. Okay, but yes, if they play b5, I would recommend a4. They would probably take, depending on your level. They could play c6. Then you could, I don't know, knight c3, you could take, okay? It's up to you from there. b5 is not a move you're going to see very often, okay? After here, you could see many other things. You could see c5 to challenge your pawn. I would for sure go d5 again, just ignore these doubled pawns. Oh yeah, forgot about that. Look what happens when they take. They double their pawns. Completely forgot about that. It also damages their structure a bit. And when you're taking with a pawn away from the center like this, like, I'm just going to deviate from the Queen's Gambit for just a second. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just going to deviate from the Queen's Gambit for just a second. In the Ruy Lopez, okay, which is a completely different opening. Sorry, I'm not sure why I'm doing this. I just really want to do it. But in the Ruy Lopez like this, when you're going to go like this, and you're going to let them, sorry, Berlin. So you got to go knight here first, and then whatever they do, okay? Say they go here. Okay, which is like rarely seen. But anyway, what you're going to do is if you're black and you take, you don't take with this pawn. You do not take with this pawn. You take with this pawn. Why? Because you're building the pawns towards the center. If you take away from the center, then you're just slowly bringing all the pawns away, and the pawns want to be in the center. Okay, that was just a little side note. Let's go back. Let's go back to Queen's Gambit stuff. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Where were we? Oh yes, takes e5. They were saying here if you can push, but also here what they've done is they've gone away from the center, right? When playing the Queen's Gambit accepted. Okay, so you take away if you see them play c5. I would recommend d5 for sure. Just keep taking space. What else? What else could they play? They could play moves like a6. Which I wouldn't recommend a move like a6. I would just develop the things. You could even take here back. I would recommend as soon as you see that the c4 pawn is free and these two pawns are not under attack, like after this, and the knight moves back, then you can take the pawn. Okay, that's what I would recommend. Take the pawn as soon as you see that your central position is your central pawns are defended. Take the pawn back with the bishop. Okay, so that is basically all I have to say about Queen's Gambit accepted. Here, just take the space. Take space. Don't go here. I wouldn't recommend that. Your queen will probably get attacked for a while. But hey, you could do it technically. I mean, it's not a terrible move, but I would recommend for sure here. or here if you really want to. But I would recommend for sure e4. Okay. All right. Enough on what I would recommend for Queen's Gambit accepted. Let's look at Queen's Gambit declined. Okay. Declined is this. Okay, this is what is known. If you ask somebody what the Queen's Gambit declined is and they know what it is, they're going to say it's d4, d5, c4, e6. Okay, but this is technically as well declining the Queen's Gambit because you're not taking the pawn. But this is Slav defense. This is a completely different realm of chess. It gets pretty different from here. Okay. I played the Slav a couple times, but this video is not on the Slav because the Slav is basically a huge deviation from the Queen's Gambit. Like if you're playing Sicilian and they play Sicilian Knight for Sicilian Dragon, they're big fat branches from the opening that require their own video. Okay. Not c6. Let's see e6. E6 is still called the Queen's Gambit. It is just declining it. And you will see this very often when they don't take the pawn. You're like, they didn't take the pawn. Now what am I going to do? They didn't take the pawn. What am I going to do? I'll just go here because I have no clue what I'm doing. Yeah, don't do that. Okay? What you want to do is, for sure, don't blunder things, okay? But you will see e6. I promise you will see e6 the higher you go on the rating ladder, okay? What do I recommend for e6? I recommend developing any of the knights, or I recommend a move like e3, okay? e3, why? e3 because first of all you're defending your pawns here. You're getting a nice connect 3 there. Pawns, you could even advance this, but most of all you're defending the pawn. You're defending the c4 pawn from here. So, why e3? Well, you would say because, well, first of all, I'm getting a 3-pawn chain, and you're also, but most of all, defending the c4 pawn from this pawn. So, I won't be able to take free later on, okay? So, e3 I would recommend after e6. I would also recommend developing any of the knights. You could develop this knight, you could develop this knight later on in the game, okay? But yeah, if they play e6, you're going to avoid all the wild things that happen. Basically, you just, what I would do is just solidly build up. I would go e3 here, just to defend this pawn. I'd go e3, they could take back, I would take back here, or you could play knight f3, apparently. But then they would defend. So no, I'm looking here at the master games. Okay, so I wouldn't play knight f3 as a beginner here. I would take the pawn. Okay, just consolidate, just get the material back to equal. Okay, so that's what I would say. I would say e3. Okay, now let's look at a couple other moves that you may play if you do not like my suggestions. If you do not like my suggestions, I do not know why you're watching this. You could play knight to c3. You could play knight to c3, but that allows them to take the pawn. Remember that. That allows them to take the pawn, but if they take the pawn, it's still, I don't know why they played e6 in the first place, because they're not declining anything. You just get this exact same position as before. You get this space in the center plus an attack on the pawn. So I don't know, if they decide to take later, then just keep on going with the Queen's Gambit accepted plans, which is going e4, attacking here, getting the knights out, castling. Okay? Okay. So e6, I wouldn't play knight to c3. I would play e3. Okay, I would play e3, or I would play knight to f3. It's up to you. Let's look at knight to f3. Just for those people that don't want to play that. You could you could be met with knight f6. You could be met with c6, for example, which is kind of a Slav thing. Yeah, it's a Slav defense, modern line. So we're not gonna get into that. Nope. You could see c5. But this is okay. I forgot about c5. Sorry, c5. This is looking pretty confusing. You're like, okay, what pawn do I take, and where, and how, and when? How do I deal with these 4 pawns here? Okay, so my advice is you play taking the d5 pawn with here. Okay, first of all, that's what I would definitely recommend. Why would I recommend? First of all, you're taking into the center, but your pawn will most likely be taken back. Second of all, they could take back here, and basically you just still have the strong point in the center. So you could defend the strong point, right? You could defend the strong point with this. You could also play, I don't know, you could defend the strong point with this. That's what I would do. Okay, so if you do see c5, you're not gonna see c5 mainly unless you randomly meet it with a low rated player that's like, oh, there's c5, or a cheater, or just a master grandmaster, or an international master, or even like a 1500, or I've played this sometimes, okay? So c takes d5 is what I would recommend, okay? Now you could also play e3 if you're a little less aggressive. You could slowly build up your position, okay? So yeah, c5 is, there are many different things you could play to c5, okay? Sometimes I even get scared and I'll just play e3. e3 is fine, there's nothing that bad about e3, but I would take here, okay? I would take here, they would probably take back, I'd go here probably, have a nice diagonal open for my bishop, I could even attack here with check, many things, okay? So that is e6. That is e6. What I would do first of all, yeah, I would do knight to c3. I would do knight to f3, or I would do e6. Sorry, e3. So yes, for sure, I would want to do e3 out of those three because it's just better. e3 out of those three. Also, if they take back, you can take back here, and then you can go on along with your plan of Queen's Gambit accepted, even though this is still called Queen's Gambit declined, because they played e6, okay? So, I hope you've enjoyed this rather brief summary on the Queen's Gambit. We'll see you in the next video, which will probably be the King's Gambit, which is basically all the opposite as this, where basically you start with e4, e5, f4, which is on the other side. Now, the King's Gambit gets much more wild than the Queen's Gambit. I'll tell you that much, because after this you're gonna meet, because this is the king. It's different when the queen is exposed and the king is exposed. This you can start getting into really wild stuff with the King's Gambit. I may not even introduce you guys to the King's Gambit in the next video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope it was helpful. Let's just look at that one more time. The Queen's Gambit once again is d4, d5, c4. Accepted is here. I would recommend building into the center, targeting this pawn with the bishop, developing the knights. I would castle kingside. Okay, some people might disagree with me for sure. Also, after this, there's declined. In declined, I would recommend here, defending the pawn, gaining some center, developing the knights afterwards, developing the bishop maybe here, and castling. Okay, that is for declined. Now, obviously, look at the whole video again if you don't just want the tiny little summary. So we'll see you in the next video. It will be a middle games video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Okay.